We are in Habakkuk chapter 3 today, and man, I have been waiting for this chapter since May when we first started into this series. I cannot wait to unpack what God has for us in this final chapter of this amazing minor prophet. So, kind of as we've been going through, we've broken up the book of Habakkuk into these 5 sections, and this is just continuing Habakkuk's correspondence with God, his prayer back and forth and hearing God's response. So Habakkuk really starts out in chapter 1 with his prayer of inquisition. That's the first prayer in the book. That's the first time Habakkuk goes before God and he cries out to the Lord in prayer. And that's his prayer of inquisition, where he was asking God in that first chapter. Then God responds, and we kind of labeled that as the point of contention. Then his second prayer is a really very forward prayer, where we called it the prayer of opposition at the very end of chapter 1, where Habakkuk basically voices to the Lord that he does not like God's response. And what I love about that is that even when he isn't happy with what's going on in his life, his first reaction is to run to God. And that's really what this book teaches us about, how to have correspondence with God, how to take our burdens to the Lord and truly cry out to him. It's not always pretty. Sometimes it's just messy, and sometimes it's blunt. But that was his prayer of opposition. And then we've spent quite a few weeks looking at chapter 2, the entire 20 verses in that chapter we labeled as the period of introspection. And the reason why is because he starts out at the very beginning saying, Lord, I'm going to stand upon my watch. I'm going to hear what you have to say to me. And then I'm going to respond. And I'm going to answer back to you after you have rebuked me. And then God does. God does answer his prayer. God responds back to him in that entire chapter. And even in the midst of all the judgment that God is showing Habakkuk that's going to happen, we still see hope, because God is a God that keeps his promises, and God is always faithful to his word. He never contradicts what he's said previously. And so now we're starting into chapter 3, this entire chapter, the final prayer in the chapter, and it's a prayer of Habakkuk. And we don't notice a response from the Lord after this in the book. After Habakkuk closes this prayer, then the book ends. And this is the most beautiful part of the book. I love this chapter. And I think you will too as we get into it. And this is what we're going to call the prayer of submission. The prayer of submission, chapter 3. Look down at verse 1. A prayer of Habakkuk, the prophet, upon Shigionoth. O Lord, I have heard thy speech and was afraid. O Lord, revive thy work in the midst of the years. In the midst of the years make known. In wrath remember mercy. This, at the very beginning, sets the tone for the entire prayer that Habakkuk prays. And again, he's just exposing himself before the Lord. He's being very transparent. Now, the first word that you might question from those 2 verses is Shigionoth at the end of verse 1. If you look up that word, it most likely refers to a passionate song with rapid changes of rhythm. And we know that this last and final prayer is indeed a psalm or a song, because the last verse of chapter 3 tells us that he delivered it over to the musicians. So this is referring to the musical aspect of this prayer. And it's probably a passionate song with lots of random changes of rhythm, and it almost comes across as being impromptu. And this word is also used by David. We read in Psalm 7, in the intro before verse 1, it says, Shigionoth of David, which he sang unto the Lord concerning the words of Cush the Benjamite. And then verse 1 says of this psalm, O Lord my God, in thee do I put my trust. Save me from all them that persecute me, and deliver me. So we see that David wrote a song in a similar form when he was going through a stressful time, being pursued by his enemies. And it's interesting that in the Bible, many of the songs the people of God would sing, they seemed to be almost improvised on the spot. Like Exodus 15 or the Song of Miriam or the Song of the Saints praising the Lord. They almost seem, they don't seem rehearsed or practiced through or polished. They just seem almost impromptu or improvised. It's almost just a sporadic expression of emotion to God, and I think that's kind of interesting. But the Lord gives him this prayer, and he records it as a song to God. And so I kind of want to take part of this episode and take a purposeful detour and talk about music, because this is the form that God records this last prayer in his words. It's a big deal. I mean, music was created by God fundamentally for the expression of our praise back to him. So the very purpose of music is not our enjoyment, but it's for God's exaltation primarily. And some of the secondary functions can be for our own edification and for our enjoyment, for evangelism, things like that. But God's exaltation, for the worship of God, that's the primary purpose of music. So a couple questions that I think it's important for us to ask ourselves when we think about music. The first question is, why do you listen to the music you listen to? Now, I didn't ask, what music do you listen to? I asked, why do you listen to music at all? Do you listen for the aesthetic beauty of music itself? Or how about for the embodied richness the music contains? Or maybe your primary motivation for the use of music is just because you enjoy it and because it's beautiful. But if that's your primary motivation for listening to music, then you're missing the purpose for which this amazing object was created. See, when a piece is sung in your church, for example, do you focus more on the musical attributes of the piece or on its depiction of God? I mean, this is tough. It's so easy for us to admire music for the sheer beauty of music itself. But that's really not the purpose. We must not allow our appreciation for good musical ability to get in the way of the music's message and of the music's purpose. So why do you listen to music? After why, we must ask, what music do you listen to? Okay, is it music that continuously directs your focus onto God and fills your heart with gratitude for who God is? There are some really beautiful pieces that contain exceptional musicianship, and they simply do not glorify God. So if we're going to glorify God in all things, and in music particularly, the music must honor God. It must point our focus to him. A third question is, what songs are you listening? Or what songs are you singing to your God? So why do you sing? Secondly, what music do you listen to? And third, what song are you singing to God? And you might not have really asked yourself this question before, but do you go throughout your day with musical prayers in your heart to the Lord? I mean, do you have this constant expression of praise to God through song in your day? I mean, this is a great way to meditate on God and on his word by using God-honoring music. And then my fourth question to you is, it takes it a little step farther, a little bit deeper. And this question is, what is your music to the Lord? See, it's fine to sing a song that someone else wrote personally, from them to God, as long as it's true for you as well. But I'm asking, what songs are you writing to your God? Because honestly, outside of prayer and Bible study, there is nothing I can think of that would enhance your walk with God more than singing to him in your own text. So take that as a challenge. We're going to dive into this prayer, but don't forget the musical aspect of it. And I hope that today you're able to think on God's goodness and sing about it.